Hey everybody, it's Rabbit. Welcome to the channel. Today what we're going to be doing is looking at some M24 gameplay, and I'm going to be taking this opportunity to give you some hopefully helpful beginner tips for players that are maybe a little less experienced. Say hello to our lovely volunteer for the day. It's going to be the M24 Chaffee. It's a really fantastic American light tank in the 3.7 BR range. We're going to start things off today by talking about the basic types of ammo, and obviously the primary type of ammo that you should be looking for if it's available to the tank is armor-piercing high explosive, or APHE. Now, the big advantage to APHE over all other types of ammo is that APHE will enter the tank's armor and explode in a fairly big ball of damage. Thus, it is very good for one-shotting enemies, and that's the primary reason why you want to use this where available. The next type of ammo, and this is kind of if you don't have APHE, this is still acceptable but not as good, would be armor piercing or AP. The problem with armor piercing is that it generates a cone of damage rather than a sphere of damage once it enters the vehicle. So you need to aim a little more precisely at the key parts of the enemy you want to take out. Some tanks don't have APHE or AP, but they do have high explosive anti-tank or heat rounds. The drawback to heat rounds is that it has a sensitive fuse, thus it can get stuck on certain objects, such as trees, bushes, fences. However, it doesn't lose its penetration over range, and it does have a high explosive effect, so it can overpressure some enemies. So heat is acceptable, but it also has the same problem as AP, in that it has a narrow cone of damage, so you have to aim for the part of the enemy vehicle you want to disable. And last and decidedly least, a round that you will only use if you have no other options is Armor Piercing Composite Rigid, or APCR. APCR is probably the worst type of ammo in the game, even though it seems to have relatively high penetration compared to other ammo types, because APCR does basically no damage. If you want to take out the enemy gunner, you have to hit him directly in the face. It just doesn't generate enough shrapnel. So if you do have access to some APCR, it can be useful if you see a particularly heavily armored enemy, because it's better than nothing, but it's not that much better than nothing, so avoid it if you can. Another pretty basic shell type that a lot of tanks have access to, but it's not a damaging shell, it's a utility one, is a smoke round. It does exactly what you think it does. You fire it in an area, it will generate a cloud of smoke. This is useful for covering a sight line if you need to move somewhere but suspect the enemy or know the enemy is watching it. Now, one thing you may be surprised by if you're a newer player and you look at the ammo I'm currently taking on the M24, I only have 20 rounds of APHE and 3 rounds of smoke ammo. The reason is, it turns out War Thunder models the ammo inside of the tank, and if the enemy hits that ammo, they can cause an ammo explosion. The ammo explosion will obviously destroy your tank if that happens, so it's not generally a good idea to take more ammo than you necessarily need for a map. And as you'll see from this game, the 20 rounds of APHE is more than enough, and part of that is because APHE does have great one-shot potential, so you generally only need 1 round per vehicle. On vehicles like the Stewart that have solid shot IP, I normally take significantly more than this, but it's always just a judgment call on any given vehicle as to how much ammo you want to take. But I would definitely recommend not taking maximum ammo unless your vehicle doesn't have a lot of ammo to begin with. One interesting thing to note is that the game will actually update the position in ammo in your tank in real time, so as you fire rounds, it will remove the rounds from the tank. So if you only have 1 round of ammo in the chamber, you will have no ammo in your tank. Unfortunately, that means you only have 1 round of ammo, so your damage potential is kind of limited unless you can reload on a cap. One thing I will say that you can do, and that a lot of people don't think about, is if you go into the options and then go to sound, there are 2 very interesting options that can help you out and that a lot of people don't really adjust. One of them says other players' engine volume, and the other one says my engine volume. So you don't really ever need to hear your own engine, so go ahead and crank that as low as it can go, which is, I believe, 60%. But you do often need to hear enemy engine volume, so crank that up to 100%. Note, it's just other players, so it will also be loud if there are teammates. But if you have good audio direction, you can figure out where the engine sound is coming from, and then use your minimap or the teammate's position to figure out if that's an enemy or a friendly. Now, even though you are going to see the enemy markers on the map, we are playing realistic mode, not arcade mode. One of the big differences is that because you aren't automatically spotted in realistic mode, you actually get a chance to use light vehicles a lot more effectively, and you get a chance to take out your own aircraft, which I really enjoy because I like my planes. Now, one of the biggest things that as a new player you want to start working on is your map knowledge and your map awareness. Now, what this means is if you look at the spawns and then you draw imaginary lines from those spawns to the capture points, those are going to be the most common places for enemies to be at. This is not 100% true, and there will still be enemies in other areas, but this will help you somewhat in terms of determining what the major movement lanes on a map are, and how to both avoid them and interact with them. Now, the map we're playing here, Cargo Port, has a little bit of an eccentricity. If you hit the default spawn button, most of the time it will spawn you on the left side of the map. However, the A capture point requires you to go across a highway, which is often looked over and sniped across. So you only get a handful of vehicles fighting over near A. Conversely, because it's a long drive towards C, a lot of people that spawn on the left side won't generally drive towards C, which means a lot of the fighting takes place in a central corridor between B and C, with some secondary fighting taking place on the right side with corridors between around C. And then you also have to remember that because A mostly just ends up in the hands of one team and doesn't really change that much, what ends up happening is that there's a lot of activity both from the spawns going to B and to C, and then going between B and C as those two capture points flip. So there's kind of an H formation on Cargo Port in terms of like team activity, and you can play around that. So as you can see here, what we have going on is that we kind of went up between B and C, and we found a gap in the enemy's defenses. We didn't immediately see anybody. Instead of going towards C, which at the time we actually had under control and we didn't see any activity, we decided to go towards the more active B to help our team out. And we've also gotten a call out from one of our teammates that there is in fact an enemy self-propelled gun, a Stir Emil, over here by B, so we're going to check that out. And of course, we're trying to avoid the most obvious route because we don't want to get shot in the back by the enemy, so we're kind of staying off to the side. And here we spot the Stir Emil, and we put a nice shot into the side. Now, you'll notice what this does is knocks out the breach and several of its crew, and the Stir Emil's kind of trying to react, and we're just machine gunning him before we get like another shot in. So that was an easy kill, first one of the match. At this point, I thought the match was going to be going pretty slowly because we're a few minutes in and we've only gotten like one kill. But it is about to heat up pretty noticeably because the enemy is capturing B. We have gotten reports that there are enemy around B, so we're going to go in and we're going to see what we can do. Now, it's important when you're in situations like this to try and use your third-person camera because, and here I spot this guy, but I can't quite get a good enough shot in because he's like, we have this concrete obstacle in the way. And there we go, knocked him out. And you'll notice where I'm shooting in a lot of these shots, right? We're shooting the middle of the hull, right below where the turret meets the hull. Here, I actually thought I was in trouble because two tanks came around very fast, and this guy kind of stopped in a weird way, so all I did was hit his engine. I actually got really lucky here though because his teammate is completely oblivious and didn't notice both gunshots and explosions going off right next to him. So you can see in this position, even though we have the back of his hull, we're shooting the back of his turret. The reason we're not shooting the back of his hull because it's just going to get caught in his engine, and it'll immobilize him, but that doesn't help me that much. So we want to shoot the back of his turret to get his crew and his gun out, and then as soon as he started turning to the side and we could see his hull, we wanted to shoot the middle of his hull because that gets the round into the crew compartment where it can do the most damage. So yeah, that ended up being kind of fortunate that they just weren't paying any attention, and that's what I'm talking about when talking about new players just being aware of what's going on around them. Is you need to be aware of what's happening with your teammate, what's marked on the map, using your third-person camera to scan, because if you're not doing those things, I mean, you saw in that scenario that M24 Chaffee was effectively a bot, like, they weren't reacting to us at all, and we got to do whatever we wanted to them. So now, we've got enough presence on B, and we're capturing B, so our goal was not to capture B anymore. And we hear enemy engine noises, so we know there are enemies up there because obviously there's no teammates near us, and if we start getting audio cues from in front of us, that has to be an enemy. And that's the big part about that is the big component about the audio aspect. And here we disable his ability to move with the first shot. He's a self-propelled gun, it can't move very far, and then we just 50 cal the crew that's completely exposed. Pretty easy knockout, nothing really complicated about that. One thing I will say with those self-propelled guns is if you try to shoot high and towards the gun itself, a lot of times it'll just go in one side and out the other, so I would advise trying to just disable their ability to move, like shooting the engine or the driver first, and then machine gunning the crew. And of course that plane did a great job. Just ran straight into that radio tower. Because obviously this is low tiers and that's what planes generally do. But anyway, and we got the Stewart. We saw him with the third person camera and we just kind of held back and like watched for him. And of course, no awareness, he's not using his third person camera. Because if he was using his third person camera, he could have easily shot over that crate. Now that's kind of a bad shot on my part, because I should have shot the back of the turret. Instead I shot the back of the hull, and you saw what happens. We got the radiator and we got like the rearmost driver, which I think is technically a machine gunner on that vehicle. So he's still perfectly operational, and he actually ends up taking out one of our teammates. But this guy is just sitting there. So we shoot him in the back of the turret and we kill him. Because back of the turret is always better than back of the hull, just because you don't want to get your shell to get caught in the engine. And here I'm trying to figure out where the other Puma was, because there was definitely another Puma. And I see him right to my left. Like he's getting caught out by my, yeah, like I actually didn't see him at first. Like somehow that, so here's a big tip. This guy starts putting out his fire right away, even though he wasn't disabled by the fire. Don't put out the fire until you're out of danger, right? Because if he didn't put out his fire and he just fired a shot at me, like he would have killed me, or at least would have had a chance to kill me or disable me. But because instead of like shooting me, he decided to put out the fire, he actually ended up dying. The fire will eventually kill you, but the enemy's gun will probably kill you a lot faster. So that's a big tip that I feel like a lot of players get wrong. Here we're kind of getting artillery called on us. We have 9 kills, we have a zone capture. Overall, it's a, to put it lightly, it's a very good game. But yeah, you can see the mistake of that Puma. Like, this is another big mistake, that as soon as the prompt to put out the fire comes out, like, people just slam that prompt and put out the fire right away. And you really don't need to put out the fire until you're out of danger. Because if you're not out of danger, putting out the fire doesn't help you. It stops you from moving your gun, it stops you from shooting at enemies. We see that Stug. Again, we're shooting the same spot, right? Middle of the hull. Because you want to try to get as much internal damage as possible, easily eliminate the Sturmgeschütz, recapture B. So now we're at 10 kills and 2 zone caps. If we were playing at a higher enough battle rating, this would be enough for a nuke. But we are not, because it's only 3.7. And here, I just absolutely blank on this Italian anti-air, the Contraro, and kind of lose some of my crew. I think I'm saved because my teammate actually kills him, but then I get knocked out. And of course, we spawn in our Hellcat. Now, one thing I will say about planes, set your bomb fusing. Personally, I use a bomb fusing of 1.5 seconds, because usually 1.5 seconds will allow you enough room to drop the bomb and get away, get out of the explosion, almost regardless of how big the bomb is. It's not 100% accurate. There are some bombs where you want to use impact fuses, and the reason, one thing I do want to discuss, the reason why I'm dropping here specifically is because a teammate was on A, and as we discussed, A is hard to get to. So I want to help my teammate on A rather than help other parts of the map, because as long as we keep A, we kind of keep the map. And there we go. Ultimately, I think we get 1 more kill, nothing too impressive, and that is going to be it for the map. And hope you guys enjoyed it, hope you had a great time, and I hope you learned something. Have a nice day, everybody.